There is an island in San Francisco Bay that for many years has created fear, mystery, and stories. Its name is Alcatraz, but for many it was just Devil's Island. In the cold Pacific fog and rough waves, this lonely rock held America's most feared prison. A place made not to reform, but to break, to hold the worst. Those who entered Alcatraz knew this. There was no way out, yet. One night in 1962, someone tried, and maybe they actually made it. But to understand this escape, we must go back to the beginning. When the federal prison opened in 1934, the goal was clear: to lock up America's most feared men in a place no one could escape from. The concrete walls are over a meter thick. Steel bars go straight down into the rock, and huge floodlights skin the bay, all day and night. Every move in and out of the cells is watched by guards trained never to look away. Life inside Alcatraz is just the basics: a bed, 3 meals, 8 hours of work. The sound of the ocean is everywhere, a reminder that cold water and strong currents are the island's second wall. Some of the most famous prisoners are Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud. But in 1960, a man who would change the prison's history arrives. His name is Frank Lee Mars, a smart man with a strong will. A few weeks later, brothers John and Clarence Anglin, who grew up on Florida rivers and are strong swimmers, are also moved there. They don't know each other yet, but fate is already putting them on the same path. After months of watching quietly, the unbeatable island starts to show small cracks, nothing sure, just feelings, an old air vent, a shift change that leaves a hall empty, a shadow on the outside wall. It is the start of something that for now exists only in the minds of the 3 future partners. The days pass slowly, but the night lights up Frank Morris's mind. In the small cell of Block B, he listens to his companion's steady breathing. The countdown starts before the night check passes. When the hall is silent again, he carefully removes the grate of the air vent behind the sink. The paint, over the years, has already weakened the edges. A pencil sharpener file, worked on during shop hours, is enough to make the first opening. Every bit of concrete dust is hidden in his uniform pocket and scattered the next morning in the yard, mixed with the dirt. A few days later, Mars asks for a shift in the laundry. There he meets John Anglin. They don't talk about escape, not even a direct hit. They talk about cold water, currents, the swirls that form between Alcatraz and Angel Island. These are ordinary phrases, yet behind every word is a plan. How long could a trained man last? How far could he go before the bay becomes a cold whirlpool? Clarence listens from a distance, memorizing, connecting the dots. One evening, back in their cell, the 2 brothers meet Frank's eyes. It's just a second, but enough for an understanding to form. They need tools, they need patience. They need something to trick the guards. Over the next few months, the 3 collect spare spoons, bits of metal from a broken vacuum cleaner, and vegetable glue made secretly with baking powder and soap. With these things, they make simple chisels and, most importantly, create paper mache heads that look like their own. They use bits of newspaper, glue, and hair collected from the prison barber. The heads, painted with coffee to look like skin, will rest on the pillows the night they escape. Alcatraz's security needs a visual check every hour, not a physical touch. A good illusion will buy them time. The digging work goes on at the same time behind each of the 3 cells. The hole gets bigger toward a service hall hidden behind the back wall. Frank drills at a steady pace. A few taps, long waits. When the guard's hammer test happens, he stops. During fire alarm drills, the tapping gets louder, so the sound is covered by the general noise. The Anglin brothers take turns to avoid suspicion, repeating the same steps with perfect care. 1960 arrives, bringing a hard winter. The water temperature drops to about 10 C, but the 3 know they can't wait for spring. Each extra day is a risk, a guard change, a maintenance check, even a new prisoner in the block. Waiting could ruin the plan, and the plan is now their only reason to live. By January, the openings behind the sinks are wide enough for a thin body to fit through. Each man builds a small cardboard bellows connected to a plastic tube to blow the dust away silently. When the guards count the prisoners during exercise, Frank watches the central tower. The sight line doesn't cover a part of the outside yard. He marks the spot in his mind. It could be the perfect place to launch a makeshift raft, but first they need a way to float. In the maintenance shop, the Anglin brothers get bundles of old raincoats. They sew them with wax thread, seal them with the heat of a lamp, making a series of air chambers. Slowly, a foldable raft takes shape, one that can be rolled into a bag that looks like a normal laundry bag. By early May, everything is ready. All they need is the right night. Frank listens to the weather report on the cafeteria radio. Moderate currents, coming fog, a thin moon, perfect conditions. Yet he decides to wait a little longer. He wants the ocean to be a bit calmer, for the freezing water to cool a couple more degrees. So the guards, used to the bay's weather, will believe no sane person would try to swim in those conditions. They know the temperature will never drop to deadly levels, but the guards do not. The important date arrives without warning. It is June 11th, 1962. The three men, without a word, understand the time has come. At 9:30 p.m., the dormitory lights go off. The paper match heads are placed on the pillows. The sheets are pulled up to their chins. Overall, the picture is perfect. Helped by the dark hall, just after 11 p.m., the air vent grates come off completely. Frank Morris slips first into the service corridor, a dark passage that smells of rust and dust. The ocean's breath echoes through the pipes like a far-off drum. Behind him, John and Clarence move in silence, holding the bag with the rolled-up raft. A network of large vertical pipes rises in front of them. Frank grabs the first pipe and starts to climb. His hands slide on the damp metal, but adrenaline erases the tiredness. The pipe grate, cut through days before, gives way with a push of his shoulder. A metal sheet with a fan creaks, then moves just enough. A blast of icy air hits the three men. Above, the sky is almost black. The thin moon is too weak to give any light. The tower spotlights draw slow white cones that pass over the chimneys and disappear over the edge. Crouched down, the three count the rhythm of the light beams. A moment of darkness, a few meters in the open. So, shadow by shadow, they reach the northwest corner of the roof, ready to climb down to the hidden shore. A large drain pipe runs from the gutter and drops straight down the outside wall. John is the first to climb down. He slides slowly, his legs wrapped around the pipe until he touches the concrete. He hides in the shadows. Clarence follows right after, without a word. Frank is last, closes the hatch, leaving behind the rock and its story of being unbeatable. At midnight, the three walk quietly along the paved road behind the building, passing old warehouses and heading toward the power plant area. They continue to the darkest and most isolated shore. There, hidden behind some bushes and rocks near the service area, they open the bag and lay out the raft made of 50 sewn raincoats. John takes out the bellows, an old concertina they turn into a pump. He connects the hose to the valve. The folds of tarp open and close like gills, pushing air into the rubberized fabric. In less than 3 minutes, the main chamber is firm, the fabric holds, then it's time for the 2 life jackets. A quick decision. Frank holds the raft. The Anglins get in the water and push off. In seconds, they are all on board. The current grabs them right away. It pulls the small boat west-northwest. The lights of San Francisco appear like a mirage flickering in the fog. The wind is biting, water splashes their faces, but no one speaks. All their energy is for rowing, for staying warm, for ignoring the quiet fear of hypothermia and sharks. At dawn, 6 hours later, the alarm sounds. Sirens break the silence. Coast Guard patrol boats go out to search. Helicopters crisscross the sky. In Frank's cell, the paper match head cracks under a guard's flashlight, showing the trick. The biggest manhunt ever seen in the bay begins. In the morning, the tide comes in, and a life jacket, pieces of yellow canvas, and maybe part of the raft are found. But no sign of the 3 men. The officials think the escapees drowned, swept out to sea, or taken by the cold. But there are no bodies, and the lack of bodies creates a legend. Word spreads along the coast, crosses states, and gets to newspaper editors. Some say the three vanished into the fog forever. Others swear they saw them in Mexico, behind dusty shop windows. Investigators check hundreds of leads but find nothing. The Anglin's mothers get postcards with no return address. "We are fine." They read in shaky handwriting. Are they real or a mean joke? Months pass, and the prison warden writes a final report, probable drowning. The file doesn't convince everyone, but those in charge need an answer. A prison said to be unbeatable can't admit otherwise. In 1963, Alcatraz closes for good. Running costs are at a high, the news says. Some think the escape hurt the prison's reputation too much. Years become decades. In 1979, the FBI closes the case without proof of death. In 2013, a letter said to be from John Anglin appears. "We made it," it says. Frank died in 2008, Clarence in 2011. "I am 79 and need a doctor." Experts check the ink, the handwriting, and DNA on a stamp. The result is not clear. The mystery hangs like a rope between two shores that never meet. Today, Alcatraz is a museum. Tourists walk the halls. They listen to the audio guide, which plays the guard's footsteps, a prisoner's voice, the clang of iron doors. In front of Mars and the Anglin cells, they all stop. They imagine the open grate, the escape into the dark, the raft being filled with air by hand. Some smile, others stay quiet. Everyone decides whether to believe the legend or the official story. And maybe that's right, because Alcatraz, even before it was stone and concrete, is the idea of a border that can't be crossed. What the three escapees did crack that idea, proving that even in a place made to crush all hope, the belief in freedom can grow. The rock still watches over the bay. Every night, the lights of San Francisco reflect on the water like an invitation. Who knows if, somewhere, one of the escapees ever looked again at those same lights, remembering the sound of the wind on the roof, the sting of the salt on their skin, the strong beating of their heart as the raft moved toward the unknown. Maybe yes, maybe no, but their story keeps whispering that no prison lasts forever when cleverness and determination meet. And so, in the fog of the bay, Alcatraz still lives not as a symbol of fear, but as the echo of a brave dream of escape. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, come with us on our journey to new adventures. Subscribe and support me so I can bring you even more exciting trips into the past and beyond.